policy impacts all of us in every single part of our life, be it professional or personal. And I challenge anyone, actually, I'd love it if someone could find one thing that's not directly or indirectly impacted by policy. I really want to know what it is, because I can't think of one.
So you challenged me before and I came up with an example and you basically took me to school on how it all works. So the example I used for you was I love playing guitar at home. It doesn't require anyone else. It's just me and the guitar. How does policy impact that?
Yeah, and that was a great example. You got me for a minute. I had to go, but then it all came to me. So if you think about it, AJ, the beautiful craftsmanship that goes into a guitar. So where does that craftsperson source their products to make that beautiful guitar that you play so wonderfully? That's all going to be framed by policy, right?
Hey entrepreneurs, it's AJ. I'm here with Salli Cohen, who's just launched a new book called Roller Coaster. Salli's an expert in policy, which is something I know nothing about. So Salli, thank you so much for joining me on this quick haphazard interview. What inspired you to write Roller Coaster and what is it about?
So, well, one, AJ, thank you so much for inviting me. This is really fun. And what inspired me was really my lumpy bumpy, if not roller coaster journey with policy. Like, policy is this crazy world. And my experience when I started out 25-ish years ago was I was employed to be a senior policy director. And to this day, that still leaves me rather bemused, because I didn't know what policy was. I didn't know how to define the thing. It would have been easier to nail jelly on the wall. I didn't know how to do policy, right? Like, how do you do that? You've got this job title and it's got policy in it. So how do you do that job? And I couldn't find definitions. I couldn't find how-tos. And the kicker is, AJ, that's still a story that I'm hearing today, told by people, not only across Australia. I've got colleagues and I work with people overseas, and they're still tussling with this thing called policy. So I wanted to give back not only to policy people, but to the wider community, because I think this crazy gift that I was given has been such an important part of my life. And AJ, policy impacts all of us in every single part of our life, be it professional or personal. And I challenge anyone, actually, I'd love it if someone could find one thing that's not directly or indirectly impacted by policy. I really want to know what it is, because I can't think of one.
So you challenged me before and I came up with an example and you basically took me to school on how it all works. So the example I used for you was I love playing guitar at home. It doesn't require anyone else. It's just me and the guitar. How does policy impact that?
Yeah, and that was a great example. You got me for a minute. I had to go, but then it all came to me. So if you think about it, AJ, the beautiful craftsmanship that goes into a guitar. So where does that craftsperson source their products to make that beautiful guitar that you play so wonderfully? That's all going to be framed by policy, right? Even if you think about the wood that goes into the guitar, where does that wood come from? What is if there are people in the wood growing industry, what do you call that? Timber, that'll do.
Forestry.
The forestry, that's the other word. They will have a whole lot of policies, right? When you're allowed to cut it, how you harvest it, how you treat it. And then if you think about the joy that you get from playing the music that you like to play, the music that you're able to access, the music scores that you're able to, be it download or buy from a music shop, they too are going to be influenced by policy. Because if you think about people perhaps who live in countries where the music that we're able to access in Australia, that accessibility isn't available for everybody, right? And even if I think about the pick, like now with plastics, how's that going to be impacted? Because you think about all the climate change, the environmental stuff, recycling, et cetera, there will be policies around that too. And so I think one of the key messages I want to give out, AJ, is most people will think policy, boring, like beyond boring. I'd prefer to watch paint dry than do policy. But actually, because it does impact everything we do, it's about us. It's about people. So got to have something good going for it, right? Even though it can make me really cranky at the same time. Not all policy is good policy, but it's a really important part of our world.
Just on that, why does bad policy exist? Because I think you and I had a quick conversation on LinkedIn many months ago. And why do you think there is so much poorly designed policy in the world?
And that's a really, really big question. And I think if I could perhaps give it some really simple answers, which perhaps don't give the full depth and the merit to it. I think there are a couple of things. I think one, we're all going to react to policies in different ways. And so a policy, if I take it, for example, that you've been dying to see this policy come through because it really impacts your work. And so you want something really, that's going to make a difference in your life. You might be really excited about that policy. I, on the other hand, might be thinking, no, I don't want that industry to get it, because if that industry gets it, we don't get it. So I might identify the policy that you've been waiting for as a bad policy because it hasn't impacted me the way I want to. But it's not a binary reflection, right? There are going to be all different sort of levels of what that decision is, or what that impact is. I think the other thing too is that because policy is about people, and I'm going to touch just briefly here, AJ, on what we call public policy. And public policy is in the realm of governments because it affects the public, the people. So public policies are 100% and then some influenced by the government of the day. So naturally, we're going to have reactions, right? If we agree or disagree or kind of think it's all right, or like, I don't know, I don't care. Reactions to what the government's policies of the day are about. And, when you live in Australia, there are, you've got Commonwealth government policies, you've got your state and territory policies, and you've also got your local government public policies. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into the mix. But I also think, and it comes back to my early experience as a policy officer, I didn't know what I was doing. And in the good old days, there was very much a hierarchical structure. So whoever was at the top said, this is what the policy is going to look like. Today, we know that bloody good policy, and that's the full name of my book, it's Roller Coaster, How to Be a Bloody Good Policy Officer. We know that bloody good policy is developed when the people who are developing the policy are engaging with the people who are going to be impacted by it. They're engaging with a range of different experts. They're engaging with the people who are going to implement it, who are actually going to bring it to life on the ground, right? And if you don't do all of that stuff and analyze it and go through all the tussles and the tensions and finally give it to the decision maker, as much as I would love to be the final decision maker at times, AJ, it doesn't come to me, it comes to the decision maker. If all of that stuff doesn't happen and it doesn't fly in the way that we want it to fly, then some of us are going to say that's a bad policy too. So it's a tricky one to pin down. And I think there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it. There's a lot of life experience that goes into it. If you think about the last referendum that we went through and the yes vote and the tensions that generated, and it's not this stark contrast of those who were for and those who weren't. There is so much stuff in between. And so for many of us, we were gutted that it didn't get over the line. And for others, they will say it was the right thing that happened. So it's messy.
It's incredibly human, and I find that really fascinating. And I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't think of policy like that. Have you got a really crazy story during your, 25 years in policy so far? Like,
Yes.
have you seen something that's really just made you go, wow, that's an incredibly challenging, or that was completely insane? Like, what's been one of your favorite stories, war stories from your work?
Oh gosh, what has been one of my favorite stories? I think for a while I was working in early childhood development, and I think the joy. And at that stage, I was a public servant, and I think at that stage, the joy of working in an area that it's really difficult to have stakeholders who disagree with things that are going to be beneficial for little people. And that was a pure joy. The tussle was, what's the defined age group for early childhood? That that took a red hot moment. That was probably one of the toughest discussions. And so that was great, right? And it went from 0 to 8. No, it should be 0 to 5. And then we landed on 0 to 5. But I bet you that debate is still raging out there. And what a great debate to have. But for me, AJ, I think because it didn't generate a political divide, I can't remember any sort of community backlash about government investing in little people and setting them up to, be able to do whatever they want to do as they, grow up. And, the cynical side of me was to be able to grow up and pay taxes. But it was more than that, right? It was to be healthy, to be happy, to be able to engage in school, to be able to have all the skills that they need, and to support mums, dads, and guardians, and aunties, and uncles, and grandparents to be part of that, hopefully joyous time in people's lives. So that's definitely one of my highlights. There were a few clangers in there. I think you need to have some. Well, you don't need to. You don't want them to be clangers, but you'll ultimately have clangers.
Wow, that's incredible. Again, something that you wouldn't even think about. What's in the book, and why should everyone, not just policy people, pick it up and have a read of it?
Yeah, I love that question. Not just policy people. It's, I think everything now that you do, and I certainly learned, because writing a book was, oh my goodness, that was giddy aunt. That's a big thing to do. And I remember and I worked with a book coach, the wonderful Kylie Zeal, who was taking me through the ropes. And she was really strict and structured, and she wasn't giving me any leeway. And I'm really glad she didn't, because the book is in, a big part thanks to Kylie and Jessica Anderson, who was the editor, because you do, it's like policy, right? There's no point in doing it on your own. You need people to say, I remember actually Kylie said something to me, and I'm going to come back to your question, AJ. She asked me a question in one of our sessions, and I said, oh, you don't understand. It actually works like blah, blah, blah. And Kylie said, but aren't you writing it for people who don't understand? It's like, very good point. It's just a wonderful point. So why for people who are part of policy? One, because I think, as I said, it impacts all of us professionally and personally, but also because policy isn't just in the wheelhouse of governments. We often think it is. That's possibly where it gets its boring badge. I had an accountant tell me that policy was boring. Hello, she was an accountant. Like, oh, I'll fight that toss. I will fight that toss. She's actually hilarious and really good value. But anyway, we were breaking the molds. There are a lot, like all businesses, private, for profit, for purpose, they will all have, and they all need to have, like there are some policies that are absolutely required by legislation. And, the likes of you and me, we've got our own businesses. There are things that we have to have in play. So we need to know how to do this stuff. You don't need to always go and, hire a consultant to do this whole suite of policies, but you've also got to be really careful about pulling something off a shelf, whacking it onto your shelf, and hoping that that's okay, because you need policies to come to life in your organization. But the shops that we buy our food from, they've all got policies, right? And again, some will be by it from legislation, but you think about your favorite corner store, AJ, that sells all those wonderful things that you need when you get home. You think, shoot, I don't have any bread, I'll run there, but they've got some yummy treats in the deli. They've got, maybe a nice little drink to take home. But that corner shop might also have a policy to promote local produce from local farmers in their area. That's not boring. That's really exciting. That's lovely. That's community spirit, right? The kids' sports clubs, they're going to have policies. They mightn't call it a policy. It might be the parent roster for washing the rugby jerseys. Am I glad that part of my life is over? Man, do they smell. But or across sectors, right? The NGO sector, the Aboriginal community controlled sector, they've all got a wealth of policies. And so they need them for themselves, but you also, like say for those organisations and as citizens, when we want to lobby governments to do things differently, it's kind of cool if we can understand the language that they use and that we can do our influencing, right?
A follow-up question on that, just what you said. If policy is so important and it impacts all of us in every part of our lives, it influences every part of our lives, what can we do as non-policy people when we're talking to policy members? Would you would you love us to do something in particular or handle things in a way or show appreciation for policymakers? Like, how do we become better citizens to deal with policymakers?
Yeah, I'll take the offer for roses and chocolates any day, AJ. But I think as citizens, we have the right to one influence policy agendas, no matter what it is. If be it in a shop, the lay by return, or if you're buying something online and you see it like you've got one day to return it, you've got a right to say, you know what, I really love shopping here, but it would make it so much better if you did X, Y, and Z. And a lot of policy is born in the heart of community where people have gotten together or to stand up and say, we need this and we want to help you. We want to be part of it because everybody's voice is important. You think of young Greta Thunberg, what she's done with climate change and her voice from a little thing. Malalia, who survived that horrific incident, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and her voice is so important. And where would we be without those voices? And every single one of us, we have a voice. We may not wish to use it, or we may wish for somebody to represent us. But I think that should be part of it. That's part of our democratic society, right? And so your voices are important. We may not always be heard, but if it's important to you, it's important for it to be out there, for it to be part of the policy consideration. And I think that's the most important thing. If you, and I'm saying that, broadly, if we leave everything to people who do policy, people like me, and decision makers, and so if I'm talking in government land, that's, senior bureaucrats and elected government officials, or even in a major industry or major companies, say the BHPs of the world, if you leave everything just to us, it's not going to serve its purpose, because at the core of every single policy, what do we find? We find us. So have your voice there, be active.
That's incredible. That's absolutely amazing. Last question, purely for selfish reasons. My background's innovation and creativity, and I've always wondered, how do policy people think about innovation and creativity? Like, how does a policy officer innovate or use creativity?
Yeah. And I really love that question. For me, AJ, policy is a craft, and I'm really proud of my craft. It's a profession and it's a craft. And I think that's also for innovators and creators, right? You have this beautiful craft and you're a profession as well. You're professional people. And I think when policy is done well, part of our innovation and part of our creativity is absolutely thinking outside the box. And I think going back to your earlier question about bad policy, there's a lot of policy that's just done by filling out a template.
Wow.
I don't care what you're writing about, but that's just, I won't say the word, but it's that kind of policy. It's not bad.
Wow.
It's a few bus stops after bad, right? It's shocking. But for me, let's say a policy landed on my desk and it was something about the creative industries or creative sector and innovation. My first port of call is to come and talk to people like you, because you know it. I know policy, right? But you know what you do. You know the heart and the core of what you do. You know this, you know the challenges, you know the hurdles, you know the obstacles. But I bet you also know where to find those buckets of opportunity, how to change that one little thing. Because that's what, can I just say to you, AJ, really important message is, what is policy? Like, you and I've been talking about policy for the wee while, but what does that word mean? And I said to you at the beginning, it was easier, I think, to nail jelly on a wall than to try and define it. Quite simply, policy is a change. Policy takes people or people and things from where they are now to where a government or an organization wants them to be, right? So, and that vehicle of change, that movement, is policy. And I bet you there are things, if I was working on an innovation or innovator and creative policy, that you'd know what those changes would need to be. We're here now. This is our goal. That's where we want to be. How do we get there? How does policy help us do that? And I'd love to help you.
That's incredible. That's absolutely amazing. So the book's called Roller Coaster. Where can people get a copy of it?
So, first you can get a copy from my website, which is www.thepolicyroom, all in one word.com/rollercoaster. And as of the 20th of March, which is next Thursday, it should be available. Do you know there's apparently 40,000 book platforms
Yeah,
around
wow.
the world? That's a lot, isn't it?
That is a lot.
Maybe it'll be on a couple of those too, including the big one.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And if you could leave with one final quote or some sort of thing that you'd love us to keep in mind as we navigate the world of policy, what might that be?
Hmm. That's a really hard question. I've got a million things bouncing around in my mind, but for people who want to start out in policy, who people want to maybe, and that might not be at the beginning of their career, right? They might be, halfway through their career and go, you know what, I want to try this thing. Or they've been thrown into a policy seat and they're like, what the heck am I doing here? You know what? It's your time to fly, and policy will give you the wings, and roller coaster will help you get there.
I love it. Thank you so much, Salli. I really
Okay.
appreciate your time and your energy and your amazing, awesome humanness in this conversation. So,
Thank you, AJ.
everyone, get a copy of the book Roller Coaster. It's available online or via Salli's website, and the link's down below.